Welcome back to the second segment of today's show. Again, we want to reiterate that we are here every Wednesday from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. on Channel 9 if you are on Comcast, and Channel 15 if you have RCN. And again, our rebroadcast is every Sunday at 5 p.m., Monday at 1 p.m., and Tuesday at 11 a.m. You can also catch our shows on bnntv.org or on VATV.org. And for today's program, we have with us Gorman. Would you like to introduce yourself to our audience? He is running for I see you in the 13th Suffolk District for state representative.
Hi, Trump. Thanks for having me on. So yes, my name is Gorman, and I'm running for Marty Walsh's old seat, is the way we're calling it in the neighborhood. Otherwise, it's too confusing with the number of special elections that go on to talk about the district as a number. So it's just easier to say Marty's old seat. So, yeah.
I know you're a good friend of Marty, and you run his campaign.
Well, I don't want to exaggerate, but I did spent last summer on his policy team, working on the city services policy team as the leader for that team, and wrote that brief for his website. And as well, I was involved with the environmental team. And then after his election, I was a researcher on the transition team.
Great. So would you just give us a little background about yourself? What have you done? How did you get here?
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting story as to how I got here. It's unconventional, if you will. About 3 years ago, I was at home minding my own business when my son came home with a letter in his backpack saying that his school, the Roger Clapp Elementary School, would close at the end of the year. And so, along with some other parent leaders, some community leaders, elected officials, even at that point, the future state representative, Nick Collins, got very active with us too. And so I became part of a collaborative effort to work together to keep that elementary school open. And we were ultimately successful. That year, 18 or 19 schools closed. One school remained open. We changed the model, changed the leadership, and became the Roger Clapp Innovation School. And so through that experience, I learned about community activism and at the real grassroots level. And then, as we said, earlier in the conversation about my involvement with Mayor Walsh, I put that political activism together with community activism. And the third piece for me was really about a real passion and interest in serving the neighborhood that I've grown to love. I'm a relative newcomer to Dorchester.
Oh, great. So when did you move into this community? So
we moved into Dorchester, my wife and I, and at that time she was pregnant with our first child. It was 2005. And we lived in Savin Hill for about 5 years. And then about 3.5 years ago, we were faced with a decision about, we had decided that we were living in a condominium and wanted to live in a house. And we had very serious, important conversations about that decision. And what we ultimately decided was there was a pull and a real draw for us to remain in Dorchester if we were going to have the kind of experience for our children and our family that we feel is synonymous with city life for a lifetime, if you will.
Great. So I'm just going to quickly translate what you just said. Hôm nay chương trình có ông Gorman, ông là nghệ viên cho ông muốn ứng cử cho nghệ viên cho cái 13th District of Suffolk District. Thì hỏi là tại ông là ai và tại sao mà ông ứng cử, thì ông nói là ông dọn vô trong Dorchester từ lúc 2005. Thì trước khi ông muốn ứng cử tại mấy năm về trước có trường của con ổng, một ngày ổng nhận một lá thơ nói là cái trường sẽ đóng cửa, thì ổng với lại mấy người khác ở trong cộng đồng đã làm việc với nhau và thành công để cho làm cho cái trường tiếp tục đừng có đóng. Thì từ lúc đó ông nghĩ là ông muốn tham gia trong chính phủ nhiều hơn. Thì từ lúc đó tới giờ, trước đây là ông Marty Walsh là người nghệ viên cho cái vùng này, thì ông có làm trong cái campaign của ông nghệ viên Marty Walsh, và ông muốn tiếp tục cái việc làm như là ông Marty Walsh hiện tại bây giờ là mayor của Boston. So I have somewhat of an idea of why you started running or wanted to run. So what sets you apart from the other candidates?
I think it's, excuse me, I think it's the fact that, that I'm new to the area, that I have no sort of, excuse me, I'm sorry, that I have sort of a newcomer's vision of the area, and a real sense of, and a desire to both represent the neighborhood and advocate for the neighborhood. And that kind of, and an energy about me, and I also have a PhD, so I have some intelligence, or at least I have some education. Ever the two shall meet sometimes. But not sure how that idiom will translate, but, but the idea that I'm an educated person, a hardworking person, with this kind of new idea and approach to the neighborhood itself.
Hỏi là tại sao mà cái gì mà làm cho ổng giống như khác những người ứng cử khác, thì ổng nói là ổng người mới trong cộng đồng này, ổng có những cái idea mới, và ổng nghĩ là ổng sẽ có một cái sức energy để làm trong cái công việc này, làm tốt công việc này. Thì so I know that you, as you mentioned, you have a PhD, you're a professor at Emerson, as well as a tutor for College Bound for Dorchester. What are your ideas for improving education for our youth?
Well, on a very policy-based initiative would be to reconsider and revisit the way we're funding charter schools. In that there's this Chapter 70 money where all this money is going from the state to fully funding charter schools, and I think that there needs to be more state assistance for the local school district, and we talk a lot about there's a real our big issue around education is related to the achievement gap, and what we're seeing is more students being left behind and not being served by high-performing schools. I mean, I mentioned the Roger Clapp earlier. That school has gone from a level 3 to a level 1 school in the last 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And it would be great to see, and the reason it's been able to do that is because it's got a longer school day. There's enrichment programs. I mean, things have been put in place at that school, and I just think that there needs to be some more equity and some more fairness. So ultimately, definitely education is my primary platform piece.
Ông nói là giống như education cho con em của mình là quan trọng nhất cho ổng, tại vì ổng một là ổng là người là thầy giáo dạy ở trường đại học ở trong vùng này, với lại thứ hai nữa ổng muốn cái idea của ổng là ổng muốn sao cho con em của mình được vô trường tốt hơn, để cho tại hiện tại bây giờ có nhiều trường đó không có tốt mấy, và những cái trường tốt thì ít người được vô, thì ổng muốn sao mà cho những cái trường nó được tiến bộ hơn, để cho con em mình được học vấn tốt hơn. So, in addition to education, what are your other top priorities?
So my second big one is public health, particularly around addiction, the diseases of addiction, drug and alcohol addiction, and mental illness. And my third kind of pillar is small business growth and development, seeing additional vibrancy along our main corridors through the district, like specifically like .ab, coming right up through Fields Corner, which is near where I live now, and so those would be the other two big important issues for me.
So what are your ideas for them?
I think it's important to think about the state rep as doing two things: representing and advocating. And so, if the state rep is out there and is plugged into the community, which ultimately, in this case, will be he, but ultimately he or she should be aware of the various changes going on. And so you start to advocate for businesses to come in. Number two, you can supplement the Federal Small Business Administration loan program through possible state loans for businesses to grow and expand. And then finally, some types of matching grant programs on things like facing, things that are simple, the front of buildings, how to make buildings more attractive. We've seen some of that in Fields
And
Corner.
that's funded by the state government?
I'm saying that it should be. I mean, that there's ways around, there's, under community development and community and business development, small business development in particular, that there should be ways to bring in funding to enhance local businesses and start to weave together the various pockets of success that we have in the neighborhood and in the district.
Oh, great. And in terms of going back to the public health and disease and addiction, what are your plans for that?
So I think we need to continue the trend away from incarceration and toward rehabilitation.
Okay.
I mean, we've criminalized people with an illness, and that's been a long-standing tradition. And I think it's because, if we push people if we push people away and put them away, then we don't have to deal with the reality of the problems that are created by these diseases. So that would be the big thing, is just trying to, that. In addition to that is, continuing the work on sober houses, on, properly managing and through licensure, making sure that we've got adequate care and treatment for people with diseases, with the addiction.
Okay, great. I'm going to quickly translate. So, ông Gorman nói là một nghệ viên có hai chuyện làm. Một là giống như represent, với lại thứ hai là giúp đỡ, là một ông nói là giúp đỡ là như là giúp đỡ những cơ quan đang ở hiện tại ở trong Dot App, nhất là giúp họ có thể làm cho cái business của họ đẹp hơn, hay là hiện tại bây giờ không tiểu bang không có giúp đỡ họ giống như làm cho cái bề ngoài của họ đẹp hơn, nhưng mà ông nghĩ là có thể sau này ông có thể giúp đỡ, ông muốn giúp đỡ những cơ quan đó được như vậy. Với lại thứ hai nữa là trong vấn đề mà nghiện rượu với lại nghiện drugs, thì ông nói là ông cũng nghĩ cái đó là rất là quan trọng. Tại hiện tại bây giờ nếu mà ai bị nghiện hay là bị cái đó thì bị bắt vô tù, nhưng mà ông nghĩ là cái đó không phải là cái solution tốt cho cộng đồng và cho những người đó. Thì ông nghĩ là phải có những cái program khác như là sober houses, hay là có một cái gì đó để cho giúp đỡ họ đừng có bị nghiện nữa, chứ không phải là cái giải đáp không phải là bỏ họ vô tù. So, what can we expect from you as our state representative if you were to get elected?
Just a sort of tirelessness,
Okay.
A real urgent kind of commitment to the day-to-day work of the job, and accessibility to there's an old story actually in City Hall about someone saying, if you get a phone call, check and see if that person's a super voter, meaning they vote all the time, or a donor, and then decide if you call them back.
Right.
That's not the way I would operate. Mm-hmm. I mean, I would be responsive to, there wouldn't be any of this not my job kind of response. I mean, to his credit, I think that Mayor Walsh, as a state rep, he gained a reputation as someone who was responsive to anyone who called him. Now, it may not have been, they may have called him with an issue that even he didn't have authority over or have, access to solving the problem, but he put people together. If it was a city issue, but it came through his office, he made sure that it got back to through the proper channels. And so I would say that it is about those things. It's about accessibility, tirelessness, and again, advocacy for whomever, reaches out to me or who I'm proactively, in the community looking out for.
Rất là quan trọng với ổng là ổng muốn cái văn phòng của ổng cho giống như là ổng sẽ trả lời nếu mà ai gọi vô trong văn phòng của ổng sẽ cố gắng hết mình trả lời, giống như cho một cái giải đáp nào để cho người cư dân ở trong vùng này được có một cái giải đáp tốt. So as going back to Fields Corner and Dorchester, and you were talking about like making it more vibrant and helping it grow.
Right.
It's a very diverse neighborhood with more than half of its residents being Vietnamese Americans. What is your view on diversity, and how do you plan on maintaining and improving diversity in that neighborhood?
I mean, I think one very specific case is the conversation that's going on about Town Field. I think that when there's already there's money for Town Field to be renovated as a playing field for softball and baseball, but I know that there's also interest in providing some kind of historical marker or historical trail or some way to mark and delineate that this neighborhood is, as you say, heavily Vietnamese.
Okay.
And I think it's important to figure out, how do you tell that story and how do you integrate that story so that we don't get into these kinds of divisive turf. I mean, it's a little bit ironic to think about that field as actual turf, right? And so there's a way in which we can celebrate. It's not enough to tolerate diversity.
Right.
We need to celebrate that diversity and have it so that public space tells the story and it's functional, right? I mean, it serves the purpose of the playing field while being also an outdoor space for representing this valuable story, this really interesting and important history that I don't know entirely, right? As a resident of the neighborhood, that I want to know more about. And so I think the more that we can integrate communities, the Vietnamese community and the non-Vietnamese residents to think about being part of this larger narrative, I think the better off we'll be.
Great. Hỏi ông là hiện tại bây giờ Fields Corner có hơn nửa người gia cư là người Mỹ gốc Việt, thì hỏi ông nghĩ sao về cái cộng đồng nhiều sắc dân sắc dân khác nhau như thế này, thì ông nói là một ý kiến là hiện tại bây giờ Town Field muốn sửa Town Field cho trẻ em được chơi softball với baseball. Hơn nữa ông nghĩ là ông muốn làm một cái gì đó để cho những cộng đồng ở ngoài biết là cộng đồng này là cộng đồng Việt Nam của mình, thì nhưng ông không có muốn làm một cách nào để cho giống như gây lộn hay là tranh cãi nhau về cái khu vực này, nhưng mà ông muốn cho một cái gì đó để cho cộng đồng ở ngoài biết là cộng đồng này là Việt Nam. Okay, so I mean, those are great ideas for diversity. Do you currently have any? How diverse is your staff and volunteers?
I actually have my biography on my website is in Vietnamese.
Right.
So if anyone who's not who feels more either strictly speaks Vietnamese or feels more comfortable, so I do have help on translation services. My committee and my volunteer corps is a small but mighty group, and so but we do have, like I said, I have access to translation services, and that's the way we've used volunteers in that way for Vietnamese volunteers.
Great. So hiện tại bây giờ ông nói là trên mạng, trong cái website mà nói về ổng, thì hiện tại bây giờ là có dịch ra tiếng Việt cho những người nào mà không muốn đọc bằng tiếng Việt hay hơn là đọc bằng tiếng Anh, thì ông khuyến khích mọi người lên cái trang mạng để biết thêm về ổng. So going back to Fields Corner,
okay.
we want to transform that from not only a tea station to we want it to be a destination for culture and businesses. What are your thoughts on that, and how do you plan on promoting it?
I mean, I think one thing to do is to one way that would be very useful would be for a partnership. I'm on the board of directors for the Dorchester Historical Society, and in the past I've talked about this, and we haven't seen it through to fruition, but I would love to see a partnership with VATV and the Dorchester Historical Society to be providing historical programs. I mean, you guys have, VATV has a great space for that kind of thing, and just to be able to create a dialogue and a conversation around the historical piece. I think culturally, I don't know, where the state funding would come into play on this sort of thing. I mean, it's probably be a city initiative, but you can push it from the state rep seat to, to have signs, ways in which you delineate that neighborhood as being, as having a Vietnamese flavor, much the same way that you would do for the North End being Little Italy or Chinatown. I mean, to do more work with signs, to have actual programs, and to bring people to the to Fields Corner for those opportunities.
Great. So ông nói là ông muốn vinh danh lịch sử Việt Nam của mình, thì ông nói như là giống như North End thì ở đó là có cộng đồng của người Ý, thì ông nói là ông muốn sao mà cho mọi người biết là nếu mà muốn biết thêm về cộng đồng Việt Nam, hay là muốn ăn đồ ăn Việt Nam, hay là muốn biết lịch sử Việt Nam thì họ nên tới Dorchester. Thì ông muốn làm việc chung với VATV để sao mà mình vinh danh được cái lịch sử của cộng đồng của mình. So, I mean, I really appreciate you placing such an emphasis on on making Dorchester a place to recognize that Vietnamese Americans have been living there for quite some time,
right.
And I want to give you the next 1 minute to just give your pitch as to why the Vietnamese American community should vote for you.
I think that it doesn't have to be about whether the Vietnamese American community should vote for me. I think it's really about a general overall support for my candidacy. I'm a person who is hardworking, intelligent, and also the kind of person that listens. And one of the things that I'm most proud of in terms of the way I approach any kind of activity is I'm all about bringing people to the table so that we can have conversations, because it's really all solutions to all problems begin first and foremost with dialogue. And I think that's one of the interesting things about our neighborhood is that it's so multilingual and so multicultural that the one thing we have to realize is that it's not just one language being spoken. It's really about several ways of thinking. And we need to be better about brokering culture in addition to language. And I would be the kind of representative that would be considerate of all the types of people that Dorchester has, and not particularly beholden to any one group or to the longest standing group or who's been there the longest, but really, who wants to come to the table and be invested. And that's the kind of candidacy that I'm offering.
Great. Thank you so much for being on air with us tonight. And thank you so much for tuning in to VATV.